going to be chatting about the Mediterranean diet, but as he mentioned, sometimes people put all different sorts of things in their food and maybe you don't know why, or why it's trendy, why it's recommended, so feel free to pick my brain about anything and whatever, and I'll do my best to answer as we go along. But in terms of the Mediterranean diet, we're first going to start off by talking about what it is, because I feel like the Mediterranean diet is not something new, right? It's been pretty popular for a while, but I feel like people throw that term around often, and patients are told to follow the Mediterranean diet often, but some of us might not really know what that means and what that entails. So we're going to talk about the benefits of incorporating that into our lives, and then also the components of that as we go. And in terms of the benefits that we're incorporating into our life, that's why I kind of think of the Mediterranean diet as more than just a diet, right? The Mediterranean diet is not something like Atkins or South Beach or the ketogenic diet, whatever it might be. The Mediterranean diet is really a lifestyle, and that's why as a dietitian I strongly encourage it, because it's more lifestyle changes that I feel can be sustained longer than something that's considered a diet, right? Because whenever we follow a diet, what happens whenever we stop following that diet? You tend not to do very well, right? That weight that you lost, you put back on, those improvements you made with your cholesterol go away, all of that good stuff. So something that's a lifestyle change, I feel like, is something more that we can maintain. So going into the benefits of the Mediterranean diet specifically, there's been a lot of studies to show that it's very helpful in terms of the weight loss and weight maintenance, like I just mentioned. So basically, anytime somebody would come in to see me for a consultation and they have specific questions about weight loss and I take a look at their diet, I generally tend to start making recommendations that would follow suit with the Mediterranean diet. There's a lot of research to show that it can be very helpful for heart disease, specifically because it's very rich in omega-3s, which we're going to get into shortly. Some newer studies showing that it can be potentially helpful for inflammation. So oftentimes doctors will say, I feel like you should start following a Mediterranean diet you should follow a diet to help with inflammation. And a lot of times patients don't know what that means. So we might potentially talk about the Mediterranean diet in terms of inflammation. And then lastly up there, of course, what we're chatting about today is how it could potentially be helpful in the world of cancer. So I just pulled this off. It's estimated that a third of cancer deaths in the United States can be attributed to diet in adults. A third of cancer deaths, okay? Including diet's effect on obesity. Additionally, a healthy diet helps to increase energy levels, facilitate recovery, and enhance the immune system. So I feel like that's pretty powerful. Even though this is a very simple statement, I feel like it's very powerful to say that a third of cancer deaths could be contributed to diet. So I feel like taking a look at what's on our plate every day can be very essential. This is coming from the Whole Brain Council and the Journal of Urology, that lifestyle habits like diet are an important part of cancer protective strategy. To see if diet relates to prostate cancer risk, researchers analyzed the eating habits of over 700 men with prostate cancer and over 1,200 controls without prostate cancer. Those that most closely followed a Mediterranean diet were 34% less likely to have an aggressive form of prostate cancer than those not following a Mediterranean diet. So once again, just feel like those are some powerful statements to have thrown out there. I mentioned a little bit ago about how there's studies showing that the Mediterranean diet could be beneficial for inflammation. For those of you in the room who might not be as familiar with what inflammation is, I really like this graphic. On the left-hand side, it's showing you what we would consider to be acute inflammation, right? So that's your body's natural response to if you have a fever, if you get a cut, that swelling, that redness, our body trying to heal itself. Whereas on the other hand, going towards the right side, it's more of that progressive destruction that your body experiences whenever you're under chronic inflammation. And you can see the different disease states that are going to be followed around that chronic inflammation. So once again, a lot of studies ongoing about how the Mediterranean diet could potentially be helping with the chronic side of inflammation. So going into the components of what makes the Mediterranean diet, we're going to start off first with whole grains, okay? So whole grains, people usually use synonymously with the word whole wheat, but whole grains and whole wheat is not necessarily the same thing, okay? Whole grains is a category, just like vegetables is a category. Anything that is whole wheat is considered a whole grain, but not all things that are whole grains are whole wheat, all right? So that's something to keep in mind, that we can be doing a whole wheat bread or a whole wheat pasta, and that's definitely a great whole grain, but other whole grains would be things like brown rice, or quinoa, oats, barley, even corn, buckwheat, an ancient grain called farro. All of those things are considered whole grains, and we want to try to get at least half of our grains for the day to be whole grains. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind, that if you're not a huge fan of wheat pasta, but we're doing oatmeal for breakfast and we're doing whole wheat bread for lunch, then we're getting closer to that half of our grains for the day being whole grains. Why these things can be helpful, there's a lot of studies relating fiber and its benefits towards cancer. We often think about fiber from whole grains being helpful for GI health, right? Getting our bodies in balance in terms of that. A lot is centered around heart health. With fiber and lowering our cholesterol. So when you see those commercials for Quaker oats and it being helpful for our cholesterol, that's definitely the case. Fiber is also highly associated with weight loss because fiber is meant to fill you up. So the recommendation for fiber is about 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day, which is a lot. How many of you think you get 25 to 35 grams of fiber per day? Anybody? Yeah. It's a lot of fiber. For a food to be considered high fiber, it has to have at least 5 grams of fiber. Along with whole grains, we're going to look at some other sources of fiber. But the big thing with fiber, if you're recommending someone to increase the fiber in their diet or you're doing it on your own, is that you have to increase fluids at the same time. Or otherwise, you're not going to want to continue to keep increasing fiber because you're going to feel very uncomfortable from like a bloating standpoint. So as you increase fiber, we have to increase fluids. Usually the gold standard for fluids was that 64 ounces of water per day, but now they're recommending to try to drink half of your body weight in ounces. Okay? So once again, whole grains is a component of the Mediterranean diet, and the reason being is because it's a very great source of fiber. Moving on into the next component of the Mediterranean diet, of course, would be lots of fruits and vegetables. Whenever we're talking fruits and vegetables, of course, we're not going to gain a significant amount of calories or fat from them. They are also one of those sources of fiber. And then lastly up there, of course, your antioxidants, which are highly associated with cancer and cancer risk. And that cliche statement of you should be getting your rainbow of fruits and vegetables, that is what's correlating to the antioxidants, because each one of those colors promotes a different antioxidant, different vitamins, different minerals, so that's why that balance of all of those colors are really necessary. How many of you are familiar with the plate method? That picture of the plate where half of your plate is fruits and vegetables? Most of you. How many of you remember the food pyramid? Yep, that doesn't exist anymore, all right? It has been replaced by the plate, and as a dietitian, I really like that plate because I feel like it's a very good visual that you can take with you anywhere. So that picture of the plate is half of your plate is fruits and vegetables, a quarter is protein, and a quarter of it is starch, okay? So whenever people come in to talk to me about an overall healthy diet, the first place that I start is that plate. The next component, which I feel like most people associate with the Mediterranean diet, would of course be fish. Reason being is that they are, fish is very high in omega-3. So I have some different abbreviations up here, and I included them in this presentation because more and more products that you buy in the store, rather than just being labeled high in omega-3, you're going to see the letters ALA, DHA, and EPA. So those are all forms that are then converted to omega-3. And ALA is primarily, is converted to DHA and EPA. So all of those words, whenever you see them on a product, essentially mean that they are going to be converted to omega-3 in your body. Oftentimes where we used to see those letters was primarily on infant formula. If you've ever bought infant formula, they're all labeled with EPA, DHA for brain development. So there's actually a lot of newer studies going on right now about the association of omega-3 and different neurological diseases and Alzheimer's and things of that nature. But what we're looking for in terms of our omega-3 or EPA and DHA is we want to be trying to do 8 ounces of seafood per week to reach the goal of 1750 milligrams of EPA and DHA for better heart health. I know we're talking prostate cancer, but both of those things, like I said, are incorporated into the Mediterranean diet, which we're associating with prostate health right now. 12 ounces per week is what's usually most associated with a decreased risk of prostate cancer. Yes?
You read a lot of things. We come across, fish intake, because of mercuries, other heavy metals that are found in our waterways now.
Yes.
So, what's fact, what's myth associated to like how much you can partake of?
From a mercury standpoint, the American Heart Association states that any disadvantages that you would get from the very, very low levels of mercury do not outweigh the benefits that you would heart health get from the omega-3 content. Primarily, the fish that's going to be highest in mercury are going to be more of your predatory fish. So unless you're eating like shark every day, or like high amounts of swordfish, those things aren't really a concern. And like I said, the American Heart Association states that anything that we would get from them in terms of benefit with omega-3 completely outweighs the very tiny amount of mercury that you actually obtain from those fish. The only people that they don't recommend that for would anybody who is pregnant or nursing. So as long as you're not in that boat, I think you're going to be okay. Okay? Yeah. So in terms of what type of fish is going to be highest in the EPA and DHA, as you can see, salmon is often touted very much in the American diet as well as the Mediterranean diet. And for good reason. They're very high in that EPA and DHA combined. So that is a great option. Some other ones on here, if you're a big fan of sardines, or just regular tuna as well, out of a can, is going to give you that really great punch of omega-3 that we're looking for. So salmon, like I mentioned, is often promoted in any type of diet. Besides it being very high in omega-3, it's also one of the very few food sources that's also high in vitamin D. The only other foods that contain vitamin D besides salmon would be eggs, just a little bit, Swiss cheese, just a little bit, and then foods that are fortified with vitamin D, like milk or cereal, those types of things. So for a lot of reasons, salmon is a really strong player in any type of diet that we're looking for. And then the next component in terms of the Mediterranean diet would be nuts. Once again, another good source of the fiber and also another plant-based protein similar to the beans and lentils. And then the other big component to them is that they're very high in that unsaturated fat. So your unsaturated fat being your monounsaturated and your polyunsaturated that we want to try to get more of. The recommendation is to try to do 1.5 ounces of nuts per day. And to give you perspective on that, 1 ounce is about 1/4 cup, okay? So that's something to be mindful of because I feel like nuts can definitely be one of those things that we just grab and we eat more and more and more of, and we don't really pay attention to the portions. So even though they do contain that good unsaturated fat, it is still fat. They are very calorically dense. So doing large amounts of them might not be right for everyone, depending on what your goals are. And then the ones that the American Heart Association recommends there are the almonds, pistachios, peanuts, pecans, walnuts, hazelnuts, and pine nuts. As you can see, cashews, which are usually many people's favorite, they don't make the list. The ratio of fiber to protein to that unsaturated fat in cashews is not very well in line compared to these other nuts. Of course, with these other nuts, we do want to make sure that we're either getting lightly salted or unsalted from a sodium perspective. Okay? All right, so going along with nuts, when I mentioned about the unsaturated fat, so unsaturated fat is that fat that's liquid at room temperature, right? Whereas saturated fat, or the bad fat, is that fat that's solid at room temperature, is causing blockages in our arteries and so forth. So here we have oils being one of those unsaturated fats, liquid at room temperature. And the reason I like to show this chart is because of the new trend of everybody doing coconut oil. Okay, everybody's like coconut, coconut, coconut. Coconut oil is actually the oil that you see there at the very bottom, because it is the one that is highest in saturated fat. All right. So just to put that in perspective, I have people come into my office all the time and they tell me what they think I want to hear and say, oh, well, I only use coconut oil. But coconut oil, like I mentioned, is very high in that saturated fat. Usually I just recommend olive oil, potentially canola oil. Canola oil is also another source of omega-3 if you're not a big fish person and looking to get omega-3 from other sources. Walnuts would fall into that as well. I know I'm jumping all around here, but so yes, I just wanted to point out that the coconut oil now is recommended. We put coconut oil on the outside of our body rather than the inside of our body, because due to that fat content, it is extremely moisturizing. Yes.
So I'm familiar with the paleo diet, and so then for them, I mean, so coconut oil is something that's encouraged in that diet, and there have been some, I mean, benefits with the paleo diet. So then, I mean, so how do you explain that when coconut oil is one of the oils that you use with your food?
So coconut oil isn't the only component of the paleo diet, and similar to the paleo diet, I respond usually the same way when people tell me they start following the ketogenic diet or they're following a gluten-free diet. I say, you know, if you look at your diet now compared to what it was before you started doing this, you probably need a lot of other good changes, right? You're probably not going to McDonald's every day, you're probably not doing this, you're probably not doing that. So I feel like there's a lot of indirect effects from people starting those diets because they've thoroughly cleaned up their diet in all aspects. In terms of the paleo diet, and if you were following a really good diet before that and now you're trying the paleo, you know, there could be some potential benefits from the little bit of unsaturated fat that does come along with the coconut oil, but it could also just be all the other components that are part of the paleo diet as well. So, okay. Any other questions about the coconut oil or oils in general? Okay. So, any other questions for me? It doesn't have to be related to this. Yes?
Is the vegetable oil the same as canola oil, like in terms of benefits?
So vegetable oil and canola oil are made two different ways. Canola oil is actually more like a man-made oil. So it kind of is a personal preference as to which way you want to go in terms of a little bit more natural versus unnatural, as much as oil can be. From a health benefit standpoint, canola oil is going to be much higher in omega-3. So from a heart health standpoint or just overall health standpoint, the combination of the good fats in canola oil is going to be more than what vegetable oil is. Yes?
What about the way you prepare food, frying, baking?
So in terms of how you're preparing food, I definitely would always recommend doing baking over frying. In terms of frying, if you still want to do something in a frying pan, then doing something like the olive oil or the canola oil is going to be a better direction to go than just, you know, straight butter or whatever it might be. You have to be a little careful when you're doing that though, because different oils and different fats have different smoke points. So things can burn a little bit more easily whenever you're doing something with olive oil compared to something else. So it takes a little bit of time to get used to cooking with those types of oils, but overall, those would be the better ways to do that. Or like I said, baking is always a good way to go.
In a pan rather than deep frying?
Correct.
Are there any benefits to coconut oil taken internally? Another question, which giant are you at, and how do you access the dietitian once you enter your giant store?
So with the coconut oil, like I mentioned, very high in saturated fat. It's not one that I usually suggest, no, to take internally, because of its high saturated fat content. In terms of Giant, I'm at the one on Lingostown Road in Harrisburg. How you access us, you can do it a couple different ways. You can just call the store, and then I have an extension where people can set up an appointment by email. All of this information is on Giant's website, so both my phone number and my email are on there. Or I have a lot of people who just stop by my office in the store and say, hey, I want to set up an appointment, and we go ahead and do that. So, yeah. Yes?
Years ago, they used to talk about margarine better than butter. Did that go away, or is that still an issue?
It did, primarily because of all the hydrogenated oils that are in margarine, and so definitely going from a more real standpoint with real butter is going to be ideal compared to that. But same thing, just the moderation of it, because butter is a saturated fat, so you just need to be mindful of that. They do make a lot of things now what they call buttery spreads, which are actually olive oil based or canola oil based, but still give that essence of butter rather than margarine. Yes. Sorry, I was pointing to you, but wherever you want to go.
Ladies first.
Okay, sorry.
Avocados have a good history of being healthy.
Right.
So what is it in the avocado that makes it a very healthy choice? I mean, it's a fruit.
It's a fruit. It's a fruit. Scientifically, from a nutrition standpoint, we call it a fat because it's what makes it so healthy is that it's very high in that unsaturated fat. So similar to us talking about the oils or nuts or peanut butter, it has that good, heart-healthy, unsaturated fat in it. But same type of thing, similar to nuts, you need to be mindful of the portion size of avocados because they are very calorically dense. So a serving size of an avocado is actually only about 2 tablespoons.
So eating a whole one is not good.
Not ideal. Yeah. So, and that seems people go for like guacamole. So guacamole being made with avocados, a serving size is only about 2 tablespoons. So if you plan on eating it later while you watch football, just be mindful of that. Okay.
So but is the avocado filling though? Like would you?
It is,
So
okay.
that's a way of, yeah.
Right, so the avocado, because of it being so high in fat, is very fulfilling, yes. So you shouldn't feel like you need to eat all of those, need to eat the whole avocado. If you do feel like you need to eat that whole avocado, then that's when I would ask yourself, am I getting everything else on my plate? Like if you're eating an avocado for breakfast and that's all you're eating, did you get some form of protein? Did you get some form of whole grain? All of that balance is what's going to help fill you up to prevent you from overeating something else. Yes. Yes.
Any any recommendations for healthy bread and healthy desserts?
So in terms of bread, like I mentioned in the presentation, going with a whole grain bread is what we want to do. So whether the bread says whole grain or whole wheat, that's what we're looking for. Being mindful that multi-grain does not mean whole grain. Okay, sometimes people will be like, oh, I eat this 14-grain bread. And I'm like, that's great, you just spent $5 on something that might not potentially be whole grain, okay? It has to specifically say whole grain for it to be whole grain. In terms of different breads that I usually would recommend, honestly, anything that's just 100% whole wheat, you know, whether that be Giant brand or whether that be one that people really like the taste of is that Dave's Killer Bread, if you've heard of that. It's pretty popular right now, and it's very high in fiber. They make bagels with it as well. So I've tried that and really like that also. In terms of desserts, so you can always think about recipe substitutions. Anytime your recipe calls for fat, you can figure out if you can replace it for something else. So oftentimes when people make brownies, because it's such a dark color, they will replace the fat in brownies with avocado, right? Because we just talked about how avocados are so high in fat and it's a good fat. You can replace that and make avocado brownies. Anytime your recipe calls for mayonnaise or sour cream, you can swap it for equal parts of Greek yogurt. So the big hype about Greek yogurt is that it's higher in protein than your regular yogurts, especially the plain being lower in sugar and so forth. Oftentimes, depending on what you're making, like if it's cookies, you can swap out fat for applesauce. So it's not necessarily that we can't do those favorites that we like, it's just a matter of potentially swapping things out. A trendy dessert right now is called chia seed pudding. Anybody here have made chia seed pudding before? Chia seed pudding, chia seeds, which are also another good source of omega-3 and fiber. They're little tiny beads, little tiny black beads. And I believe it is 4 tablespoons of chia seeds for ½ a cup of almond milk. And you mix that in and you let it sit for at least 4 hours, but usually overnight is best. Those little seeds expand and swell, and they're going to thicken the almond milk to the consistency of pudding. So I've made this a lot for classes in my store, and it really does work. That it's just the consistency of pudding then, and then you can add other flavors into it. Like I usually just add vanilla extract and fruit on top of it to kind of give it that vanilla pudding essence without all of the fat and sugar that comes along with vanilla pudding. Does any of those sound good to you?
What's the ratio? What's the ratio again?
4 tablespoons of chia seeds to, actually I'm sorry, I think I said ½ a cup, but it's a whole cup of almond milk now that I'm thinking of it.
Thank you.
Yes.
I think this lady was.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I had kind of a two-part
Sure.
question when it comes to getting the nutrients. When we were talking about the oatmeal, first question, does it make a difference whether it's like the quick oats versus the not so processed down ones? And the second one is with the organics, to be, organic or not organic?
So the first question is a lot easier. In terms of oats, it doesn't matter if it is steel cut or quick oats or old-fashioned rolled oats. They all contain the same amount of fiber and the same amount of protein. The difference is really a texture preference. So, for example, steel cut oats, whenever those oats are processed, they're literally just cut on a steel cut. And so they have that like short, choppy type texture. Whereas old-fashioned or rolled oats are really put through 2 rollers and are flattened to that consistency. And then your quick cooking oats are the same thing, where they're rolled like that, but then they're just chopped up a lot finer, so they cook faster. But despite that chopping or that rolling, they still have that whole fiber intact. So because of that, like I said, from a nutrition profile, they're all the same in terms of protein and fiber. It's really just a texture difference that you're looking for. In terms of organic versus non-organic, I tell people it's a personal preference, and I know that's probably not the answer that most people want to hear, but just because something is natural or organic doesn't necessarily mean that it's healthy, right? Like if you go down the natural and organic section of Giant, we have Doritos in the natural and organic section. It doesn't mean by any means that those are healthy. It just means that they're processed differently. So that's why it's more, like I said, a personal preference in terms of what you're okay with having in your body versus not. A couple of different things that I point out to people is that if you do feel passionate about buying organic, but from a cost standpoint, organic is certainly more expensive. Every year they do come out with what they call the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15, and that changes every year. So the Dirty Dozen being those that are what they consider to be highest in pesticides, and then the Clean 15 being the 15 that they consider to be lowest in pesticides. So that way, if you would like to buy organic, but you don't want to buy an organic watermelon, which is usually on the list for the Clean 15, then you can more so focus your money towards those ones that are listed on that Dirty Dozen list. Yes, yes.
You gave us a list of vegetables. What about fruits?
So in terms of fruits, really it's just going back to the rainbow that I mentioned. I haven't found anything specific in relation to prostate cancer and a specific fruit as much as I did with the vegetables. Ones that are most highly associated with being packed with antioxidants are going to be more of your blue, your purple, so things like blueberries, raspberries, those types of things. Those ones are also going to be the highest in fiber, I actually think it is raspberries out of all of the fruits is highest in fiber because of all the little tiny seeds that are in them. So those are the ones I would start with. Yes.
What about soy milk and pomegranate juice that sometimes people are recommended for?
Soy milk mixed with pomegranate juice?
No, not mixed, like
Oh.
two separate.
Two separate things. Oh. I was like, this is a new one. I haven't heard of it, but I don't think it would taste very good. In general, oftentimes people give Americans or just the world in general a hard time that we still drink cow's milk. Like they say, well, we're the only mammals that over the age of 2 still drink milk. And we're also the only mammals that use computers and drive cars, right? So I don't think that we can be compared in that nature and in that way. From cow's milk versus soy milk versus almond milk, it really depends on what your goals are. So for example, if I have somebody who's diabetic and they're making smoothies for breakfast and they're loading it up with all this fruit, so all this natural sugar, if they add cow's milk to it, then we're adding another natural sugar, we're adding another carb to that. That could be potentially putting us over our carbs for breakfast. So in comparison, adding soy milk or definitely adding almond milk, soy milk being a little bit lower in carbs, almond milk not having any carbs, that could be a good way to get that dairy in there, a dairy alternative, without overdoing the carbs. But also keep in mind that even though almond milk is not a source of carbohydrates, it also does not have any protein. So even though it is, derived from almonds, with how it's made and how it's filtered, it doesn't retain any of that protein. So if we're looking to get that source of protein at our breakfast, which we should, the recommendation is to try to get 15 to 20 grams of protein right off the bat at breakfast. People tend to make better choices and decisions through their day because they feel more full and focused from that protein. All of that to say that it kind of depends on what you're going for. If you need that protein source, regular cow's milk or soy milk is going to give that to you, whereas something like almond milk is not. If you're diabetic and we're trying to watch the amount of carbs, something like soy milk or almond milk might be the better answer. But if you're going to get a sweetened soy milk or a sweetened almond milk, then we've basically blown the carbs anyway, right? Because they have a lot of added sugar to them. From a lactose standpoint, I will say if you're going the direction of soy milk or almond milk because you can't tolerate lactose, but if you would still like to do something like a cow's milk, besides just doing like lactate brand milk, Fairlife milk, if you've heard of Fairlife milk, is naturally lactose free because of how it's filtered, and also because of how it's filtered, it's much higher in protein than just like your straight milk off the shelf. So those are the options, yeah.
Have you heard about resveratrol?
I have not. What have you heard
It's in the
about?
skin of red grapes.
Mm-hmm.
You only get it by eating the grape.
Okay, not
Buying it
drinking the
in
wine.
pill form doesn't work, or red wine.
Okay, does not, okay. Interesting, no, I have not, I could definitely look into that though. But that's interesting that they do specifically state that you have to do it by eating the grape, because I feel like so many recommendations go along with that and wine.
Yeah, it's in the skin. It's
Okay.
not in the actual food part.
Part, okay.
But they sell it as pills, but the pills are not absorbed.
Right, which a lot of supplements are in that boat where they're not absorbed as well as the actual fruit. So yeah, I'd have to look into that, I haven't heard that. Yes?
Yeah, kind of get back to the liquids again. The pomegranate, I had that
Oh, I forgot to
question too
ask.
on the
Sorry.
pomegranate, but
Sorry.
also with the V8, either low sodium, or the high sodium, depending on if you've got high blood pressure or whatever. But with the lycopenes in the V8 in tomato juice,
Yep.
with prostate cancer, what is your awareness of that?
So I don't have a huge awareness in terms of it directly relating to prostate cancer. I know a lot of lycopene studies do recommend that for like better urinary tract health and so forth. In terms of it being considered a vegetable, 8 ounces of V8 juice can go towards those 8 to 10 servings of vegetables that are recommended for the day. Low sodium versus not low sodium. I generally tend to recommend low sodium. The regular V8 is pretty high, especially if you ever get like the spicy V8 is even higher. So I would still go with the low sodium from that standpoint. I In terms of the pomegranate juice, so it's the same as anything else. I would always recommend eating an orange over drinking orange juice. So same thing is going to hold true for, I would say try eating an actual pomegranate rather than always doing the pomegranate juice. If you are going to do pomegranate juice, a serving of juice is only about 4 ounces, which looks like this. It's a half a cup. So that's very easily overdone, especially for someone who might be a diabetic. Doing a whole 16 ounces of pomegranate juice is going to be your whole meal in terms of carbohydrates. So you're going to feel a lot more full, and you're going to gain a lot more of those vitamins and minerals that are associated with pomegranate juice if you were just to eat a pomegranate. If you're not familiar with eating pomegranate straight from a pomegranate, you cut it open, and those little beads inside are called arils. Whenever you cut it open like that, you want to put it under water, and you pull it apart underwater because that's going to prevent those pomegranate arils from making a massacre over your kitchen. And the pomegranate arils will sink to the bottom, and the membrane, that white stuff, will float to the top. So it's a super easy way to clean pomegranates. And right now, with it being fall, we're getting into pomegranate season. So definitely something to pick up. Whenever you're trying to pick out a pomegranate, you want to try to avoid ones that have really flat edges. You know how sometimes you can pick up a pomegranate and there's flat edges all around it? That means that it's starting to dry out. You want to get one that's more circular, and it's going to be juicier. Yeah.
What's the recommended number of carbs a day?
So the American Diabetes Association recommends no less than 135 grams of carb per day, just for normal brain function. So usually I tell people, I usually tell females 45 to 60 grams of carb per meal, and males I usually say 60 to 75 grams per meal. And then if we're doing snacks, about 15 to 20 grams of carb. Yes?
I just wonder what you, back to grains, what do you think about the Ezekiel bread?
I think the Ezekiel bread is a great grain. We have those sprouted grains in it. It's a great option, going to be much higher in fiber. Definitely a little bit of a different texture to get used to, but I think that's a great option. Most people find it more filling as well because it's usually a thicker slice of bread. So I think something like that is fine.
I like the English one.
The English one. Cinnamon raisin ones over here. Yeah. Yes.
Last question.
Okay.
Last question. We have talked about it before, but the avoiding of nitrates in a lot of the foods. That one thing I've been aware of is nitrates in a lot of obviously the processed meats and whatnot, but a lot of other even cheeses.
Right. Yep. Definitely, potentially can be the biggest one, like you mentioned, though, hitting the nail on the head would be more of the deli meats, the hot dogs, the sausages, things like that, and some cheeses. But those things you'll always be able to see on the labels, so definitely being mindful whenever you're